Welcome to this video about an introduction to SLCN, part 4 of 4, Interventions. What is an intervention? Within the SEN graduated approach, an intervention is a targeted and time-limited form of support which is additional to class-based high-quality teaching and reasonable adjustments. That is, this support is additional to communication supportive classroom strategies, more personalised class-based differentiation, and the provision of ordinarily available equipment, resources, and assessment modifications in regular lessons. Sometimes interventions can take place within regular lessons, reducing withdrawal time and maximising the opportunities for the pupil to transfer and link their knowledge and skills. Some interventions need to take place away from regular lessons and can be scheduled during school time or as part of the extended school day, for example in the early mornings or in the afternoons. Common types of intervention for pupils with SLCN. Interventions for pupils with SLCN often focus on developing skills in one or more of the following areas. Attention and listening, including turn-taking. Understanding spoken language, including working memory. Understanding and using vocabulary. Sentences and grammar. Storytelling and narrative. Speech sounds, stammering and voice, and social interaction. When do we need to consider putting in place interventions? If a pupil is not making good progress from their starting points and/or is at risk of not reaching their academic potential, despite adaptations within high-quality teaching, it is time to consider putting in place one or more interventions. This is part of the assess, plan, do, review cycle. If the pupil has not been fully assessed and identified as having SLCN, it is also important to evaluate the impact of any interventions provided to the pupil alongside high-quality teaching, reasonable adjustments, and the provision of any additional equipment or resources when exploring whether a profile of SLCN is likely. Triggers for considering putting in place interventions. It is important to ensure that you have the regular opportunity to scrutinise routinely available progress data for pupils with SLCN, with the use of robust data tracking tools and supported by pupil progress monitoring systems. The key aims of this work are to quickly pick up concerns around fairly small steps progress and to identify data trends in their performance and their engagement or behaviour for learning. For a pupil with SLCN, concerns may be more prevalent in subjects such as maths and English or literacy, which rely heavily on language and communication skills. Additional sources of evidence include pupil work samples, specific assessment data, for example tests, behaviour and engagement data and information, and the views provided by the pupil and their parents and carers during meetings. What is active listening? An active listener is someone who realises that messages cannot always be understood and takes responsibility for seeking clarification when confused, stuck, or unsure. We want pupils to recognise when they have not understood completely. Learn to try and solve a problem by themselves first. Learn how to indicate when there is a problem. And develop independent learning skills. Saying when you don't understand. Pupils with SLCN find it difficult to recognise when they do not understand. It is a good idea to explicitly teach pupils in small groups to recognise why they didn't understand and practice asking for help. Teach children a set phrase when they don't understand. For example, can you break it down for me? Can you say it more slowly? What does this mean? Barrier games to support listening. Barrier games are a great way for pupils to practice listening and using their phrases to ask for clarification. Identifying words they don't understand. For pupils with SLCN, it is useful to discuss different levels of knowing a word. Explicitly teach how to work out the meaning. Look at words on either side, think about the whole story or paragraph, think about what you already know and look it up. This can be a targeted focus in class or during a small group intervention. Word finding difficulties. Teach pupils how to talk around the word. They can use gestures or draw a picture. Describe the word, and you can prompt with initial sounds or by asking questions. Colourful semantics. Colours are used to help pupils identify the important elements in sentences and learn how to put these together in the correct order. Pupils are gradually taught to associate different types of words within particular colours. The colour-coded elements can then be used to build sentences. For example, this colour-coded strip shows the colours used for the elements. Who, also known as the subject. What doing, also known as the verb. What, also known as the object. And where, also known as the location. This prompt would be used with a child who was working on creating sentences, such as the man is eating an ice cream in the park. Receptive language, understanding. Interventions may be around understanding levels of questioning, blanks. Understanding key words within an instruction called information carrying words. For example, find the teddy and find Teddy's eyes. Concepts and propositions such as under and on top. Pre-teaching of vocabulary. Pupils with SLCN need many more exposures to learn new words. 36 exposures compared to 12 for typically developing children. Pre-teaching key vocabulary before the lesson will allow greater access to learning for pupils with SLCN. Pupils with SLCN have difficulty learning phonological sequences, sound sequence, semantic components, word meaning, and syntactic clues, using sentences, grammatical features. Choose words that will be functional. Choose words that will be key to understanding the topic or text. Choose a range of words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and concept words, and multimedia and multisensory methods. Pre-teaching of vocabulary. Focus on Tier 2 words. This is very important for academic success across the whole curriculum, but also consider how many Tier 1 words the pupil has. A pupil with only a few words will need to learn words that help them get by in your everyday routine. Collaborate with the pupil, parents, speech and language therapists, and teaching staff. Pre-teach vocabulary before the rest of the class. Revise more often and over several days. And draw links to known words. Word maps. A word map is a graphic organizer that promotes vocabulary development. Visuals. Use a symbol or picture or object. Talk about the meaning and link to other words they know. Give a definition in terms they understand. Put it in a sentence and tell a story using the word. Describe it, where you might find it, what does it do, and what else is it like. Teach how it sounds, what sounds it begins with, the number of syllables, and words it sounds like. Teach prefixes and suffixes. Teach comprehension strategies, and review it often. Here is a word map example. Narrative skills. Pupils with SLCN often have difficulty sequencing their language, and WH words are often confused. Practice WH questions with visuals and link to classroom practice. Recognize that when can be a particularly difficult word. and use a narrative frame to support pupils to sequence their language. Augmentative and alternative communication, AAC. Some pupils need support to learn alternative ways to communicate other than speaking, or how to use their language to communicate. This may be by using token exchange or picture exchange communication, PECs, communication boards, and voice recorders, such as big match switches. These are used to introduce core vocabulary, for example, my turn and more, model language and increase participation, and reduce frustration. Support emotional well-being. Remember the link between SLCN and SEMH. Teach vocabulary for emotions and use the word map templates. Be aware that talking approaches will be difficult to access. Use visuals and other means to share thoughts and feelings. And build supportive and trusting relationships. Social communication and interaction. Pupils with SLCN are more likely to find peer interaction and forming real relationships difficult. It is important that pupils with SLCN are provided with support for their social use of language, including the use of resources to scaffold conversations, turn-taking, and conflict resolution. Build awareness of own strengths and weaknesses. What are these characters good at? What are they not so good at? And what might help them? It is important that pupils with SLCN build self-awareness and know what works for them. This helps them to develop independence, self-esteem, and bring the strategies they've learnt during an intervention into the classroom. This is key. Reluctant speaker or selective mutism. The definition is a persistent failure to speak in specific social situations despite being able to speak in other, more familiar situations. This inconsistent pattern of talking is an anxiety disorder, whereby the child speaks happily and freely in some situations, but not in others. The inconsistency has been apparent for a month or more. It's not better explained by another communication or language learning difficulty. The inability to speak in certain situations is limiting academic or social functioning. They might want to speak but feel that they are unable to do so. They become afraid of the act of speaking and people hearing their voices. They become wary of any situation which could lead to an expectation to speak. And in time they learn to avoid communication, to avoid the anxiety it causes. Reluctant speaker or selective mutism. What schools can do. Remove all pressure to speak. Provide opportunity, not expectation. Avoid cajoling, gentle persuasion, bribes and reprimands. All of this amounts to pressure. Provide alternative forms of communication for the whole group that the child can use until they are ready to speak, for example, toilet passes. And never remove all need to communicate. The sliding in approach. This approach aims to move the child through the stages of confident talking. Staff must work in partnership with someone that the child is comfortable talking to. This might mean a family member coming into the setting or a key worker going to home. The child is part of the intervention and small steps are agreed with them at each stage. Study skills support. Pupils with SLCN in upper key stage 2 and above can sometimes find it difficult to receive additional and explicit guidance to develop their study or learning to learn skills. This can cover, for example, understanding how they learn, organising their work, improving their memory, reading strategies, spelling strategies, learning new information and researching, writing strategies, presenting their work, and preparing for assessments and exams. Study and homework after-school provision. Some pupils with SLCN can find homework and self-directed study and coursework a significant challenge. This can be due to a range of reasons which we've explored in earlier videos of this program, including difficulties with attention and listening, literacy skills, memory, and possibly personal organisational skills. It can therefore be very beneficial to offer a study or homework provision in your school. This provision can simply provide a space for undertaking work with adult support when needed. It can also possibly include more structured sessions which can model effective study habits, optional and extra interventions, enrichment activities, and extra access to assistive technologies. Using access arrangements for controlled assessments and exams. Does the pupil have access to assistive technology that is part of their normal way of working? Does the pupil need extra time, typically 25%, to complete an assessment if under test conditions or any rest breaks? Does the pupil need to complete an assessment outside the classroom under staff supervision? Does the pupil need a support staff member to scribe for them? If the answer is yes to any of the above, especially for controlled assessments and exams, it is important to ensure the pupils with SLCN are provided with explicit instruction in how to make best use of the access arrangements that they are entitled to. Supporting parents and carers to support interventions at home. Firstly, if a pupil is accessing one or more interventions, this should be in agreement with the pupil's parents or carers, and ideally, they should be provided with some periodic feedback about the outcomes of these interventions. Parents and carers of pupils may find it helpful if your school can provide resources, occasional workshops or meetings to understand what they can do to support their child's provision. This applies to all of the different types of interventions that we've covered in today's video and covers possible activities, technologies and strategies that can be tried at home. Considering a full speech and language assessment. If a pupil presents with SLCN, plus school-based activities have been carried out to identify signs of SLCN, plus a range of appropriate class-based strategies have been implemented by teachers and teaching assistants, plus evidence-based intervention has been put in place and evaluated for impact, and the pupil is not making good progress from their starting points, at this stage of the SEN graduated approach, the school and/or parents or carers should consider a full assessment. The purpose of a full assessment undertaken by a speech and language therapist is to identify which areas of SLCN the pupil may have difficulties in and to what extent. What does a formal speech and language assessment involve? An assessment session will typically last between 30 minutes and an hour. It can be useful for a therapist to speak to parents about their child's early history and development. During the assessment, they will look at how well the pupil's speech and language are developing, compared to what we would expect for a child of their age. Depending on the age of the pupil and the type of difficulty they have, they will do many different tasks and activities. For some children, particularly younger children, the assessment may be undertaken through the therapist playing alongside the pupil or watching them play. This is known as an informal assessment. They will observe the way the pupil understands language, how well they are talking, and which sounds they are able to use in their speech. Specialist level of assessment and advice. A speech and language assessment may identify some pupils as having significant speech and language and communication difficulties, which may include receptive language difficulties, expressive language difficulties, pragmatic language difficulties, developmental language disorder, and stammer. Recommendations for class strategies and any interventions will be provided following an assessment. This is the end of this video. You can view more videos on this channel in the About series.